What's up guys, it's Rowan here from ATAR TV, and one of the critical things that is so important to excel in years 11 and 12 is consistency, being consistent. There's this idea that if you get 1% better, right, over the course of a year, at the end of the year, you are 37 times better than you were at the beginning. Now, that's ultimately because of this thing called the compounding effect. Now, whether or not you're 37 times better or 2 times better, I think the whole point shows that doing consistent work day in and week out has a huge impact on the overall results you'll get. It's much easier though to say, oh great, be consistent. It's much harder to be consistent. And so in today's episode, I'm sitting down with Koushik. Now, Koushik did incredibly well. He scored an ATAR over 99 while balancing a whole lot of extracurricular commitments as well. But throughout that journey, what Koushik struggled with, as I think all of us do, is consistency. And so we're going to find out exactly how Koushik managed to deal with the challenges of inconsistency so that he could work consistently to ultimately do incredibly well over the course of year 12. So welcome, Koushik.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So now, consistency, that was your number one challenge, is that correct? And maintaining it?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, tell me a little bit more about it. Why was consistency hard for you to achieve?
Throughout year 11 and 12, I had this thing to I had this need to do well in everything I did, but obviously that didn't go to plan, and having that desire ultimately led me to be inconsistent more than being consistent.
Wow, okay, that's a little different. So in other words, yes, you wanted to do well, but then that got in the way of you being as consistent as you would have liked.
Right.
Is that just because you felt a bit overwhelmed by the sort of goals that you'd set for yourself? What was the thing that caused you to be inconsistent? Was it was it overwhelm? Was it a lack of motivation? Was it distraction? I guess, what was getting in the way of you keeping that consistency?
I guess having that kind of desire it gets in the way of you actually doing it, so it becomes, I guess, a burden. If you do have it as an overarching goal, it can become a burden. So because say you're trying to do well in a test, so when you're doing it, that's the only thing that's in the back of my mind. It was oh, I have to do well in this, I have to do well in this. But then I'm not in the moment. I'm not what do I call? I'm not preparing to do well. I'm doing it because I have this end goal of doing well in everything I can. So that kind of gets in the way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, cool. So if I could tease a couple of things out in terms of what I'm hearing, and I think this is really interesting that you're sharing this, because I think so many students have these expectations and hopes, right, to do well. And often it's not even from parents or family or friends, it's internal expectations, right, that we might place on ourselves to do well. And you're right, the way that I would describe it is it's almost like you're in your head, right, about it. So instead of getting in and just being in the focus zone doing the work, right, because of the expectations, it creates a bit of anxiety. Maybe not in your experience, I'm speaking in my experience now. It can create a bit of anxiety because you're stressing out about, oh, I got to make sure I achieve the goal. I got to make sure I achieve the goal. And then you're right, it means that the quality of the work that you're doing is maybe not as good. Maybe you're more tired and a little bit overwhelmed at times, so you don't do the work at that point. So how did you change that then so that you could become more consistent over the course of years 11 and 12?
So once I realized that this was a problem, I dialed back a bit. I was like, well, maybe I don't have to be perfect all the time. Maybe having a couple of mistakes is fine. And I talked to a couple of my friends, I talked to my parents about it, and they were super supportive. So I thought, why should I be striving to be perfect all the time? So I dialed it back, and it turned out to be a good decision on my part.
Perfect. So two things for students listening that I want to really highlight. One is, this may not be the same for another student. The reason they're being inconsistent might be another reason. Yeah. But I think the important thing that you did was you first paused to identify, why am I not being consistent? And I think a reflection exercise is so important, because I think unless you understand the root cause, you can't change it, right? And so for someone that's listening, it's great, if it might be distraction, it might be motivation, it might be something else that's going on, but pause, reflect, work out what is the reason for your lack of consistency, because at that point you can put a plan in place. Yeah. Which it sounds like pretty much is what you did, right? Pause, reflect, plan. Now, the second thing I want to share or really highlight from what you have shared, which I think is really important, is counterintuitively, actually, what you did was take the foot off the sort of pedal, so to speak, right? And counterintuitively dial down, the goals in some respects, or the expectations that you had, but that was actually what was important to help you do better. Yeah. And I think that's so true. And then secondly, it sounds like as soon as you spoke to people about it, rather than them judging you or being, maybe not supportive, it sounds like everyone was incredibly supportive of you in that decision. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And were you nervous at all in telling people about it and sort of saying, hey, like, is it okay, like, for me to maybe not go so hard here and have these expectations?
Yeah, it was definitely nervous because I painted this image of myself that I really wanted to do well. So I thought maybe going to my friends or my parents and talking to them about this, that I might let them down. So I was definitely nervous, but in the end, it turned out to be fine.
It turned out to be great. That's awesome. So for other students that are maybe nervous about just opening up and sharing with friends or family why they're struggling, whether or not it's about consistency or something else, like, what would you say to them?
I would say give it a go because, in your head, you're always thinking that it might go wrong, but in reality, most of the times it doesn't. So just give it a go and you'll be surprised about the end result.
Awesome. Now, so you've done that. That's the first step really at the end of the day, because now it's still about being consistent. What were things that you did, maybe planning wise, timetabling, otherwise, whatever it might be, that helped you consistently do work week in, week out?
I would say definitely having a scheduled timetable in place. So towards the beginning, I didn't really have one. I was just going on the fly, just doing stuff as it came in. But then I realized having an actual timetable, structuring my work for the week was more efficient because I could cover all subjects equally, and that made me do better in all of them eventually. So yeah.
So amazing. So you've got this timetable, right? And that's, again, you sort of experienced the pain of not having one, or the challenges of not, and then the difference. Let's maybe just talk a little bit about what that looked like to help other students with their own timetables. So how did you structure it? Did you plan specific subjects on specific days, or was it more like time blocks that you would do study? What was your approach to constructing the study plan that you used?
For me, I wanted to have a timetable, and for that to be flexible at the same time. So what I did was I set aside some time each day to do a couple of subjects. So for example, Monday I would do maths and English, Tuesday I would do physics and chem, something like that, so that it's not too restrictive, but at the same time it's scheduled in a way.
And so you had clear start and end times on your timetable?
Yes.
So you knew, great, I'm going to study from X to Y?
Yeah.
And that was Monday to Friday plus the weekend? Did you have days off?
I did have Sundays off, but every other day it was more structured.
So Sundays off, I think that's an important thing to note, because I just want to remind everyone, at the end of the day, you ended up scoring 99.3 in terms of your ATAR, which is fantastic. You're doing computer science at UNSW, is that correct? Computer engineering, yeah. You've got to get that right. And so I think, the important thing here is to say, hey, you took a day off every week, right, as part of that plan. Sundays were a relaxed day. And so I think that's really powerful for, I think, people to hear. Yeah. Why was taking Sunday off important for you in maintaining consistency?
Well, it's because it lets you take your mind off studies for a while, because always having it in your mind kind of brings you down, kind of wears you out. So taking that time out, spending it with friends and family is really good to rejuvenate you for the upcoming week, I guess.
So in other words, it was the sort of thing that helped you have the energy to be consistent for the next week, yes, for the next 6 days, right? So it was like that recharge so that you could keep going, which is fantastic. So you've got this study plan. Was it written? Was it on a spreadsheet? Was it a calendar? Where did you store your study plan so you could see it and use it?
Well, I did it online, and then I printed it out and I stuck it in front of my desk so that it was always in view when I was studying.
See it all the time. Yeah. Great. And were there weeks that you didn't follow the study plan all that well?
Definitely there were, because you can't really follow it all the time. Yeah.
Cool. So one of the things I hear for a lot of students, right, is when they say, I tried a study plan, it didn't work. Mm. And it didn't work because, sometimes you can't follow it strictly, etc. What I find interesting is often that they didn't stick to it long enough. So how long did you find it took you to have the study plan before you really started getting into a bit of a rhythm with it?
It did take me a while, actually, because towards the beginning of year 11, I didn't really have a way to structure my things. I tried a couple of different ways. Nothing really worked out. And then I had to talk to my friends, my teachers, and they really helped me to find a plan that suited me.
Cool. So it took you a little while to get it right. I think that's the important thing. It's if it doesn't work for the first time, don't assume that it doesn't work at all, right? Like you're gonna just have to keep tweaking and iterating. Now, even though you might not follow it perfectly in a week, you would still try to use it again the next week, right? Why?
It gives you a sense of like direction as to what you have to do, because even if you don't follow it in like this week, next week you kind of have it in your mind as to what to do, when to do it. So that kind of gives you a clarity of mind as to like the things you need to do and get done by the end of next week, I guess.
That's the first thing in terms of maybe one of the things you did to maintain consistency, get a bit of a study plan in place. Like, were there anything else that you did, tactics, tips, tools, advice that you used to sort of stay consistent?
I also took part in a couple of extracurricular activities. So I was like in my school's play, I was a prefect, and I also did a couple of sports. That also helped me take my mind off studying, because sometimes taking your mind off studying is what helps you be consistent, because it gives you the energy to keep going, I guess. So that's very important.
Amazing. And I think that's so counterintuitive, right? Because so often when you look at it, you're like, oh, I need to be more consistent with doing my study. And then actually the answer lies in doing other stuff. And by doing that other stuff, it helps you be more consistent, which is not obvious, which is, I think, great that you're sharing this. Any other tips or advice that you'd have, Koushik, about really, staying consistent over the course of the journey?
Well, I would say have an end goal. So for me, that goal was to do, I guess, like something related to computer science, computer engineering at UNSW. So having that goal and knowing that consistent approach will help you get there is probably an important thing to have.
Essentially, the reason you wanted to have that goal was because it was the reminder of why you were being consistent.
Exactly.
Right? It was like that underlying why, like, okay, I've got a reason for this, not just for the sake of consistency, like actually I'm working towards something here.
Yeah.
Amazing. Any other tips or advice that you would want to share with year 12, year 11 and 12 students who are currently, going through the journey?
Well, I would say don't give up on your hobbies, your passions, because they can really help you do well. For me, like, I really like football. I continued to do it until year 12, and that really, really helped me take my mind off things, socialize with friends, just have a good time. Because even though the ATAR is important, it shouldn't define your life, I should say. It should be an important part of it, and you should also balance it with other stuff things that you like. So yeah.
Now, final question: if you could go back in a time machine to the start of year 11, right? What would you do differently?
I would probably be less nervous, because at the beginning of year 11, like everyone around me was telling me, oh, from now on, everything counts, everything is super serious. I would probably tell myself to relax a little bit, take the days as they come by, essentially just live in the moment, I would say.